is called an exalens webinar, and the plan is to be about one of these a month, possibly more. This is only the second one I've done for primary so far this season, one last week, and the plan is that they're going to be hosted regularly by me. So any feedback you can give at these early stages would be really, really helpful. So there's a feedback form you can fill later on. So the plan is the welcome, 4 o'clock, and 10 past 4, we're going to look at eSafety or online safety displays, physical computing, and then some online programming IDEs. And there's an M missing there, I just spotted. Now, I'm not sure if you've been here before, just a couple of things. I've just said hello. You should be able to see a little window with me in, a little video caption. And that's a movable window. If you're on most devices, if the window's blocking the way, you can move the window around. Most of what you'll see are these notes that I've got available here, and I'm just scrolling up and down slowly. That's what you'll see most of the time on the screen. And there's a little chat window, which I will keep looking at. And if you've got particular questions, to help keep it interactive, please type things into the chat. So I'm typing something into the chat, typing something in now. Now you can see I've typed something into the chat. So it would be good if you type things in, and you can interact with each other because you can see each other's names. We've got Beverly and Dom and James and Amy and Sarah and maybe 2 Jameses. So another thing you need to know is this webinar is being recorded. So just after I press the stop button, I will then download the video content, and then you'll be able to access that afterwards. It means if I mention a certain thing that you didn't quite grasp, you'd like to, go back and watch it afterwards. And these notes that I'm using, so I'm clicking on a document now and I'm highlighting this line here. This is an interactive document that I'll be using, and at the end of the webinar, it may be that I've added some more notes and things. And one thing I will do is where it says here to be shared here afterwards, this will change and it will have a link to a recording. So this document, you should have received an email with a link to it. If you haven't, here's another way you can find it. So what I'm going to do is in my browser, I'm going to open a new tab just to show you how you can find this. Okay, and you go to exa.foundation/events. When you do that, you should be presented with a list of different events that are available. Most of these are in-person events, and most of them are free to attend. But this one is a free to attend online. 21st of May, Teach Computing Primary, and then you can see there where click notes, and then that will take you to this. I'm just going to increase the font size because it does look a little on the small size. And I just mentioned a moment ago that there'll be an evaluation form. You don't have to wait till the very end, but please do fill that in. It gives me a little bit of a pointer to the future sessions. So I'm going to move now to the next part of the webinar, which is all about eSafety displays. Now, I'm more accustomed to talking about online safety, but you'll see why I've called it eSafety in a moment if I just scroll up here. Okay, resize this window a little bit so everything fits in. I am expecting that I'm going to get smoother in the delivery of these, but I used to do these webinars quite a lot, and I've got out of a habit of doing them. And anyway, right. So this was because I frequent lots of forums and groups where teachers hang out and ask other teachers questions. And one that I've spotted was one teacher in a primary school had asked this question here. She's been asked to create an eSafety display in her classroom, and she asked others to make suggestions. And not that many people replied to the thread. So the idea is here, I'm going to make some suggestions that you might want to think about. And it might be that you then decide yourself to take up 1 or 2 of these ideas yourself. So I've added a link to a photo album here, which is online. And I'm just going to click on that link now, and that will open up some photographs in my browser. And it'll take a little while for those photographs to open up on your browser and in the webinar. But because you've got the link, you could actually, if you want to open these in another tab, and you could have a look through yourself. Now, it's particularly the first photograph that I want to draw your attention to, because this photograph is the end result of a project that I was working on in my school. So there's different times in the year when you decide to refresh your displays, and I decided to have one linked to something we've been doing in lessons about social networking. We're talking about the advantages and disadvantages and the things you need to be aware of. And what I actually did was I asked my students, and actually not just the students I taught, but all the students in the school, to take part in a competition. And the idea of the competition was you had to submit a design for a wall display, and the lucky ones, they would get selected, and they could work with some members of staff to have their wall display created or constructed, and there was some prizes, and the prizes were vouchers to buy equipment and things like that. So this particular one here, I still remember the name of student Chris who designed this one, and it was quite tough to do to narrow them down. And I asked the students to go forward to explain like why they came up with this particular idea and explain the theme and all that sort of thing. So the nice thing about it for me was I didn't have to get too heavily involved in that, because with a teaching assistant and the students' ideas, they were able to go away and work on the particular idea themselves. The photograph over on the right-hand side, so I visit lots of schools in my work, and whenever I can and I get the opportunity, I take photographs of displays that I've seen. By putting these two photographs together, you can probably see that on the right, this is a very different display altogether. This is a display which is showing student work. And some schools decide to do that. They decide that the display is going to feature student work, and here's a close-up of some of those. Now, if you can't read what's on these right now in the webinar, don't worry, because when you click on the links, I did take some high-quality photographs of those so you can zoom in. I'm not saying myself that I believe that these particular displays are like the best ever online safety displays that you're ever going to see, but it does show one way that lots of people can contribute to the display. In my travels visiting different schools, I've seen that some they really do invest quite a lot of time in cutting out little logos and things so people can see what it's all about. We've got photographs. If you were going to do the competition yourself in your school, I'd be suggesting that the theme of the competition, a really, really good display in some way, when you look at this particular display, it should change your thinking in some way. Maybe have a bit of a, oh, that's something I hadn't thought of, or, oh, that's got me thinking in a different way. And if you were asking your students and your children to design a display themselves, that should perhaps be the question. What would a display look like to get people to think differently about online safety? There is another sort of display that I've seen, and it's not an online safety one particularly, but it's one where there's particular themes and words within it. And what I've done here, going back to my notes, is it could be that there's particular themes that throughout the year that you want a weekly focus. Some people talk about, some teachers about, oh, what we're doing for Internet Safety Day or Safer Internet Day, which is something that happens annually. But if you had an online safety display that was up throughout the year, it might be that you might have 12 months of the year or 8 months or 39 weeks or whatever. You might have different themes to focus on, and you could have some aspects of display that are dry writable, so you can write on them with a dry, a board marker, and then it could be that things are cleaned off and whatever as the week goes on. One thing that we did in the school I was teaching at was at the beginning of the year, the academic year. So I only ever taught ICT and computing lessons, so I didn't teach all the other subjects as well. And at the start of the year, it was problematic for us in that often things like usernames and passwords and all those things hadn't been set up properly because the school network had been upgraded over the summer. So we used to find that starting the year with a focus on online safety was a great way to make a good start because it didn't require all the resources to be available online. And with each different year group, depending on their age, we would have a different focus that we would. So, for example, so some of the children, like 11 years old, we could talk about social networking and how it was, how we could do that in a healthy way. Whereas younger children or older children, the topics would be different. We do hear from time to time things like Fortnite, for example, is getting a lot of press at the moment. Today on Women's Hour, for example, there was lots of people on there who play Fortnite talking about it, and there was their grandparents, their parents talking about their experiences. So one of the dangers, if you only have your online safety focus at the very beginning of the year, and then there's something that's quite topical like online games and things like Fortnite, if you're only ever doing it that once, then it doesn't allow you to pick up those topical themes. So by having an online safety display that can have, whether it's things you can ask people to cut something out of the newspaper and bring it in, or something that they've seen about that you could perhaps print out, you could have something that topically would go in that little section on that. I'm going to pause for a moment and maybe ask if you could tell me whether you've had any thoughts or responses to those ideas I've put forward yourself, like the competition idea or whatever, or maybe you've got a really good online safety display in your school that you've seen somewhere. So this is over to you. This is a bit where you type something in the chat. And some of you now thinking, oh, Dom and Sarah. Oh, great. So you're typing something in the chat already. It is nice as well if you have displays that have some interactive element within it. I don't necessarily mean lights and buzzers and things that you press for things to happen, but you can have things like little panels where things are hidden behind. Some of the displays I had in my classroom would ask questions in one corner, and then the answers were printed upside down elsewhere to help, prompt what might be the correct answer. So I'm waiting to see what your responses are that come through into the chat. So I'm just saying hello to Sarah. I think we met in London. We're waiting for a taxi down to the vet show, if that's the right person I'm thinking of. So yeah, across links across other subjects, and that could also be the nature of the display. Is it something that they're going to be writing, or is it something going to be very creative? It can involve some photography in some way. One of the things that I don't have a photograph now of it, I wish I'd done, but it was we asked the children to take different facial expressions and emotions which they have to try and pose for photographs. So if I do one like now, so it would be like, so that might be trying to convey the feeling of anger, frustration also, So we had these photographs and the children had to try and match the words up with it. And part of the connection with that was to try and think about when you're online, how difficult it is to convey emotion. So when I read something now, like Dom has written something on there, and I try and read that, I've no idea what such of emotion or thought is going through Dom's mind when he's written that, and he doesn't know what kind of emotion it's going to provoke within me. And about how, as you're watching this video of me jibber jabbering at the moment, you can see whether I'm in a happy mood or not. Whereas when you're communicating with people in a sort of text-based format, you haven't got that. So it was interesting, linking to PSHA. So right. So Amy's suggestion again, this is a nice thing. She says, like at the beginning of the year, she likes to ask people what their favorite things and they've been using. Now, I don't know if you do that with the same children year on year, but that's quite a nice thing for you just to hear, so that like if they're in year 3 and year 4 and year 5 as they go on, you'll hear them talk about the different things that they are using. So I'm now going to move on to the other topics. So each of these topics is just meant to be about 15, 20 minutes each. Some of them won't give you the solution. They're just to prompt a little bit of thought and discussion as we go along. What I'd like to do is I'd like to segue in some interesting things that I think you might be interested in. So the thing I'm going to mention at the moment is Hello World magazine. You probably hear me mention this quite a lot. It's a free magazine for teachers, particularly if you teach computing, if you have responsibility for computing. Do you subscribe already? Just type yes in the chat if you do. If you type no, then I might just mention a little bit more about it. So easy way to find it is here's a link to helloworld.cc, and you can go on the website to read all about the magazine, but it's so much nicer to have a paper copy that comes through your door. I think I'm still waiting for my issue 5 to come through the door, but I guess the postman's probably having a read of it before it comes through. So people who teach in all sorts of different contexts write articles for the magazine, and it's got lots of ideas, not just about online safety, but about how to teach computational thinking. In issue 5, I wrote a piece all about school trips and how you might have a STEM trip or a computing trip. So I like to carry my copy around with me, but somebody borrowed it the other day and they haven't brought it back. So I was just going to show it to you, but it's just such a great magazine. So there was just a little bit of a segue. It's completely free if you're an educator, so if you're a teacher, then you just sign up and you get a paper copy. And you can also, if you've got one of these things, the iPad, you can read it on there as well. So that was just another thing I thought you might be interested in. So now I'm moving into the second segment, which is all about physical computing. Now, I really feel like I could, just for the next year, every week do an hour on physical computing. But so 15 minutes is really not going to do it enough justice. What I hope I'm going to do is mention a few things and a few people that I always think of when people ask about crumbles and microbits and code bugs, and I always suggest these people go to. So in one of the areas that I have been listening to teachers asking questions, I see this question come up very, very frequently, especially at this time of the year. And the question is phrased in lots of different ways. Somebody's just given me £1,000, or I wish I could get the children more excited or engaged in computing. Somebody said we can spend some money, and what should I buy? Now, the question that comes up quite a lot also is to do with robotics. So I'm going to ramble through this list and mention and pick out a few things. And please, as I mention them, if you can in the chat, if you're going to go, oh, I've not heard of that, or that sounds great, or I've got some of these already in my classroom, because it allows you as the attendees to interact among each other as well. So I would hope and imagine that most of you have heard of the Crumble already. It's a very low cost physical computing platform. I wouldn't really want to call it a computer as such, although it is capable of behaving like a computer does. So it's a microcontroller is a better word to use, and it runs on a power supply, and you can program it to do certain things. So in some ways, yes, it does perform and do what a computer would do, but it's all the things that you can connect with that really make the Crumble so exciting. So I've seen people use them for all sorts of different inventions, but particularly because they're great with robots, you can connect motors to them and control those motors, and you can make the motors go in different directions. Going back to my list of things, so the Crumble costs about £20. Now, some people have formed the idea that, I've got 30 in my class, 30 children, so I need to buy one Crumble each. And I'm not sure if you decide to go down that route, whether you're going to find that will actually be very successful. Some people initially just buy 1 or 2 Crumbles to begin with and then introduce them to their digital leaders so that they can see how the children in their group managed to, because it's not just the crumble itself, you need a computer to program it on, and then you need the power supply, and whether that's batteries that you're going to throw away or rechargeable batteries. So there's quite a lot of other little loopholes and considerations that you need to take into heart. So this is why I'm going to suggest, if you've not heard of these people, you try and find a way to get in touch with them. So one teacher, Jo, she teaches in Southport on Merseyside. Helen teaches at a little village up in West Yorkshire, and Donna teaches at a school in Salford. And I attended a workshop at Edge Hill University. So at Edge Hill, they run about 3 or 4 Saturdays that are free to attend in the year, where teachers of primary and secondary go along together. And Jo, Helen, and Donna, they didn't know exactly this was going to happen, but all 3 of them had gone to deliver a Crumble workshop, and it turned out that the 3 of them ended up delivering the workshop together, which was perfect for me because I got to hear how they all do it differently and organize. Now, what I said before about trying to get in touch with these, you might know I spend a lot of time on Twitter because I just find it's a great way to get in touch with teachers in other parts of the country and to find out exciting things that they're doing. So what I've done is I've put some links here to their Twitter profile. So even if you don't use Twitter, it doesn't matter. You can just click on this link and it will take you to Jo's Twitter stream or her feed. And as you go through that, you'll be able to see, oh, she's retweeted something that Donna has been talking about, and Phil Bagg, we'll come on to Phil in a moment. And there'll be photographs and links to things in there, and you'll be able to get some more ideas from Jo. Jo is wonderful, and the things she's been doing with the Crumble are very, very inspiring. She retweeted this thing the other day, which is a video. Now, the video won't play very well in the webinar. You'll probably just see a photograph of it. But it's a thing that I've seen lots of teachers work on in schools. So you probably won't be able to see it. You'll have to click on the link yourself. But it's a small plastic disposable container, the type you might get if you get a Chinese takeaway. And what they've done is they've collected and assembled a few of the Crumble accessories together, and the children are to program these robots within their own classroom. So I think part of the danger is if you buy too much of the accessories and parts and components at the beginning, you might not necessarily need all of them, which is why I was advising you maybe to get 1 or 2 to begin with. And it might be that, I mean, I know this time of the year is a bit crazy with everything that's going on in school, but it might be that you just buy a couple of them. You allow your digital leaders to have a little bit of a tinker with them, and it might be something that you yourself take home over the summer. Jo was telling us all sorts of funny stories about how she's got her and her husband to solder things together at home. Now, the other thing I would suggest as well is, okay, I've got some photographs somewhere, and I can't remember where I put the link now. Photographs, right? I will add those in later on. But Jo has herself created all these little booklets as well that takes you through things in different stages. Now, the reason I've put Donna's name in as well, so Donna is doing some similar work that Helen and Jo have been doing with Crumbles in their classrooms. But one thing that Donna has done recently is Donna has successfully applied for some funding through Rocket Funds. And if you go on Donna's profile, because some people say, oh, well, I wish I had the money for the Crumbles, and I wish I could buy this, and I wish I could buy that. So Donna is actually, she teaches us an inner city primary school in Salford that are not rolling in lots of money. So Donna's had to find different ways of raising money. And it's an interesting story if you read through her tweets. And even if you just say like, oh, sorry, Donna, I'm a bit of a stranger, but I was listening to Alan O'Donoghue and he was saying that I could talk to you. So it's a great way. Now, Phil Bagg, he's one of my primary computing heroes, and he's very, very excited at the moment that his Crumble Creations book, you can now order it on Amazon. Phil is a huge fan of the Crumble, and you may have already seen that if you go to visit Phil's site, coded.co.uk, Phil's already shared quite a few resources on there, like the Crumble Maker cards, which are very similar to the ones I was talking about that Jo has developed. So these are like little instruction cards that you can download. You can print them out. Okay, that one's upside down, but you can see, and they take you through step by step about how to set up the crumble. They're printed upside down, so that obviously you print it out once, you fold the paper in half and fold it again, and then you have your little booklet that you can use. Another person I'm going to mention is Nick Hughes. So Nick is a teacher over in, well, he teaches in West London and he lives in East London. And Nick, the last couple of years, has come to Exabytes, which is a conference that we run up in Bradford. I'll mention that in a moment. And Nick has run some Crumble bot workshops. And again, Nick is a great person to follow and to make friends with and to ask questions. And he has a blog as well. And I recently went to a Computing at School hub meeting that Nick hosted at his school. And while we were there, we looked at all the different, examples of things that people are using. Now, David Whale, I've not put any links yet in here, but David Whale, some people refer to him as the microbit wizard. So I've stopped talking about crumbles now, and I'm mentioning microbits. Here's my question to you. Do you have any microbits yourself? Have you bought any? Have you got one? Has somebody given you one at any point? Oh, Radovan's got 10. And oh, so okay, so the microbits are out there. Microbits, they get a similar price point to the crumble, and they do have some similar qualities, but they are very, very different platforms. So the microbit has got a lot of sensors on board, and when you take the microbit straight out of the box or the packet or wherever you keep it, you can start doing a lot of things with it straight away. Whereas the one thing with the crumble is you really need to connect the crumble to things to make things happen. Um, one of the things I like to do is I get often invited into schools to run these microbit hack jams, and I've put some links to some videos that you might want to watch afterwards. So 2 weeks ago, I was visiting a school in Bath or Bath, depending on how you pronounce it, and we had about 60 students came along to a microbit hack jam afterwards, where we get the students to it's like a parlor game I used to play at home when the TV wasn't working with my parents. You write something on a piece of paper, you fold the paper over, you give it to somebody else, and so on. So you probably played something like that before. But the students have to consider inputs and outputs and location. So what they had to do was I suggested things that a microbit could be used to sense. And then we talked about outputs, which are the things that the microbit could control. And you could do exactly this with a crumble. And then what happens then is, so each time you write an idea down, you pass it on to somebody else. And then the final thing, you have to think of a location where it can go. And then by the time all the bits of paper have gone all the way around the room, you then open it up and you have a piece of paper with 3 random elements that you haven't written. And it might say something like, situated in a desert, it has to listen out for the sound of a baby crying. And when it does, it sprays water. So they then have to make up some crazy invention based on this. If you later on, I'm going to click on it now just to show you. It won't play very well in the webinar, but you'll be able to see, oh, in fact, there's a photograph. So you can see the students were working in teams, and it was 1 microbit for every 3 or 4 students. And we gave them paper and pens and masking tape and scissors and cardboard so that they could prototype their ideas. I've run these events mostly with families, so the parents come in as well. And if you've had some issues that have cropped up in your school to do with the online safety, the previous topic that we were talking about, it's nice sometimes to get parents and families in together. And it might be that that's a nice way to bring up these issues. I think I alluded to that in the previous webinar that we had. But there is a video that if you click on the link afterwards, somebody created a 1-minute video that gives kind of an overview. Why am I showing you this? Because I'm trying to say it's not just something that you would necessarily use in your lesson on a Monday morning or a Friday afternoon, but it can be used as a platform for people to come together and invent things. I'm going to close those links down and go back. Now, There was another thing I wanted to mention on the theme of microbits to get you started. So um, I'm a great believer in digital leaders and allowing the children to come up with the ideas. And if you had got some microbits now through Code Club or that you've bought yourself, it may be that you've got some year fives and year sixes at the moment who they you probably need them. They need to go to the club, and it might be that they can design some kind of activity for the others. And there's a video here that again you might want to watch later on. It won't play very well through the webinar, where I was invited to take part in an event at the Tate Modern, and they didn't need me to be there because it was led by students and pupils, and I was in a group with a young girl called Avi, who was 10 years old, and Avi was designing a workshop. Let me just play a little bit of the video. Just skip forward because I think we might have to get to picture that should, this might give a better idea. I'll just pause the video when we get to there. So the workshop that Avi designed, okay, so she's 10 years, and in fact, we could just see her head just there in the bottom right-hand corner, was all around inventing objects with the microbit. And she spent, say, like it was during the half-term holiday, she spent the Tuesday working with some other pupils to design the workshop and then delivered it the next day. And these were workshops attended by members of the public who came into the Tate Modern in London, and I was just absolutely blown away. Here was this 10-year-old girl talking to complete strangers she never met before, all about how to use the microbit. It's so amazing that these tools existed, didn't exist, when you and I were at school ourselves as students. So maybe you could put something like the microbit or the Crumble and the Code-Bug, which I didn't get around to mentioning, into the hands of your digital leaders and see what ideas they have about teaching robotics and getting others inspired. Now, I'm just going to pause. Was there one particular thing there you feel was a useful takeaway from that session? I know I've actually just done a lot of name dropping in that session, but if you don't, if you say, oh, well, I know Joe and I know Helen, but I don't know Donna, try and make a new friend in some way with one of those people. Nick, David. David is a STEM ambassador based down in Essex, and you probably, if you just do a little bit of search, he's on Twitter. He's known as Whaley Geek. And I know not all teachers use Twitter. You don't have to have a Twitter account to make use of Twitter. You can just go and find out. And David comes up with all of these great ideas that worksheets and projects and things for school. I didn't really mean to say worksheets, and it just snuck out. So my question to you, if you're still there, and I hope that some of you still are, and you haven't fallen asleep, which was, is there one particular idea or suggestion that I've just made then that you might take away from that last 15 minutes or so? So just a bit where I'm hoping you're going to type in, you say, oh, I've heard of Joe, or oh, I'm gonna take a look at Phil's book, or oh, the microbit hack jam. That seems like an interesting idea. It's something that we've been thinking about doing in our school. So there was a conference in London in February. It was around the 20th of February, and it was a Computing at School conference. And I mean, I don't live in near London. I live about 300 miles from London. But the one thing about London is if you're going on certain days, you can sometimes get good price train tickets. And this was on a Saturday, and I think there was about 40 workshops altogether, and they've been running it for the last 2 or 3 years. So I guess there might be one again next February in London. And Nick, who I mentioned earlier, Nick Hughes, he ran one of these Crumble workshops at this particular conference. The Pass the Paper exercise. So that might be the name. I didn't know what it was called. I just remember that we used to do it for something else. I would say before you spend more than £20 on Crumble resources. So if you've got £20 and you can spend that, great, maybe 30, 40. But if you're talking about spending £500, £600 or more, really try to make contact with one of these teachers. The three that I've mentioned here are in the northwest of England. Phil works down in Hampshire. Nick, West London, and he travels further afield. If there's a particular area that you're in, I might be able to recommend or suggest a particular, like if you're in the northeast or whatever. But what I was going to suggest is you could try and visit or at least talk to one of these teachers, because they will be able to make certain recommendations, and it might be that there is other things they can suggest as well. Now, my plan is to spend the next 15 minutes or so on the final topic of the afternoon, which is online programming IDEs. Look at that, that's terrible. There was an extra M that should have been in there. Now, when I'm talking about programming now, in primary context, I'm now not really going to mention computational thinking, not so much about algorithms. I'll literally just mean the coding thing that we talk about. Now, it's taken it's perhaps too much emphasis. In fact, I would say there's no perhaps. Way too much emphasis is put on the programming elements, the coding elements, and there's so much more to computing than just coding. However, there is a question that I've seen crop up, and this session is just to focus on that particular thing, which is some schools have got managed services, in as much as if they want to install a new piece of software, there's a cost, because they have to pay somebody basically to install this software. Or there's other reasons, or other barriers, like, oh, it's not compatible with the particular computers that they have. So the question that comes up from time to time is there any programming software that we can use in a browser? So this question has been, we've been told we can't install programming software. What online alternatives can we use? So one's just come up in the chat that I haven't actually heard of. So we will have a look at that in a little while. So what I'm going to do is, I'm considering now in the next session that this might be a teacher of Key Stage 2 who's asking this particular question. So I'm going to direct you towards some block-based ones, and then we will have a look at some text-based ones as well, because some teachers of Key Stage 2 are doing text-based programming with their classes. So if you took part in the last webinar, you will have seen on the 10th of May that I mentioned Rapid Router. It's a particular favorite of mine, not just for how it looks or how it works, but because there's a few other little features that are not as well known about it. So when you go to it, it has a sort of like a directed program where it suggests that you start. So you might start at the very beginning with level 1 and level 2 and so on. So let's just show those people who are not really sure what level 1 looks like. And resize my window so you can see a lot more than I'm looking at. You don't have to be able to see all of this. It's just enough to give you a flavor. So when we're in level 1, here's a challenge. So straight away, if we're talking about Key Stage 1, some of them are going to have some issues reading these kind of language. So I'd be saying we're definitely talking about Key Stage 2 and possibly Year 4, Year 5, Year 6. I've used this with Year 7s and 8s and older as well. Now, what happens is you have these blocks available, and then you basically take the blocks out. You decide, yep, we needed to move forward, and then somewhere lower down there's a button that says play. And then what happens is the van starts up, and it's, oh dear, I gave it too many blocks. So there's a little bit of, you can learn as you go along, you learn from your successes, and you learn a lot more from your mistakes. So we can try again. This time we had too many blocks, so I just need to get rid of one of them, or drop it in the bin, or just drop it over here and click play. And I've now learned that one block is enough to do that. So I showed this in the last webinar, and the other thing I mentioned in the last webinar is, if I put my browser down here, you can see there's a little number at the end. And one of the nice things about this is you can try numbers. Now, I wouldn't suggest that you tell your students to do this, but it might be that there's certain challenges that you want to try certain people out. And if you get students on there and registered, you can actually track their progress if that's the kind of thing that you want to do. Now, I will stop talking about Rapid Router in a moment. It's just because I'm going to compare some others to it just so we can see. So the challenges get slightly more complex, where it's still, this is based on sequence. So it's how many times you have to move forward or turn left. There is an element later on where it has to make decisions. Now, if we go back to our list, so Rapid Router was the first one that was on there. I'm sure you will have heard of, and at the very least, you will have probably tried some of the Hour of Code resources with your classes. So you will see lots of parallels with these sorts of things. Can the children think about which blocks need to use to get the character, whether it's Elsa from Frozen or Steve from Minecraft to move. So you will see a lot of patterns of these sorts of things. A lot of these are derived from what's known as Google Blockly. So Google Blockly is the last particular one I'm just going to suggest that we look at today. So if we click on this link, when you go in, you're presented with a menu that you can choose from. So the menus, you've got puzzle, maze, turtle. Okay. Now, I'm going to just today focus on the turtle one, and you will see some parallels again. So what we've got here is we've got some instructions that tell us we have to create a program to draw a square. And you can see how that instruction was animated. So now this is for a first introduction, for a first experience, this is probably just a little bit too advanced. You probably would have, if it's the very first coding experience, you probably would start off with the puzzle blocks to begin with. But in terms of, if we're thinking of progression, and your students are already familiar with the block-based programming approach, then what we can then do is we can then encourage the students to think about how many times might we do this. Because I've got such a small window, I'm struggling to fit everything in, but there is a palette of tools that are available down here at the bottom. And the challenges get more and more complicated as we go. So if I just go back a few steps. So we've got a puzzle, we've got a maze, we've got moving a bird around there. We've got a thing called a pond tutor, which you and I will probably recognize has lots of similarities to the Beeble bot, the Beebot. I was thinking of another one as well. And so there's umpteen amounts of resources and many, many more. Now, while we're still talking about block-based ones, this is just a little bit of a segue to something called EduBlocks. Now, it doesn't actually answer that question, but I just wanted to mention it anyway. EduBlocks has been developed by a young boy called Josh from Preston. Yay! He comes to our Preston Raspberry Jam. And when Josh first got the bee in his bonnet about computing, he was in year 5 and he was a digital leader at Mary Magdalene's in Preston. And his first foray into programming was mostly block-based programming. And then he swiftly moved on to text-based programming, particularly Python. He has tried some of the other text-based programming languages. But Josh has now developed his own programming language called EduBlocks. And you might not remember the name of it, but if I start to show you what it looks like, you will probably recognize it then. But Josh has now been nominated and won awards for this. It's not something that works at the moment within a browser. It's something that you would download it onto your computer. And let me just zoom out a little bit. But it segues neatly into some of the other things because you can use it to program the microbit. But again, it's another block-based approach to programming. But one of the really nice, neat features about EduBlocks is it allows you to flip the blocks so that you can see a Python-based. So it allows you to flip between the two so that you can very nicely view what the block-based programming would look like in a text-based programming language. Now, back to my list. So I'm just rattling through these. I'll probably spend 2 or 3 more minutes. I'm going to show you a couple of favorites of mine. So now I'm going to focus on text-based IDEs. I didn't really expand on what I mean by an IDE. So I'm pausing. Do you know what IDE stands for? You don't have to, but maybe you can impress me and show me. So I'm going to pause. I know there's still some people in the chat. We've got 8 people at the moment, and you could always go on Google or a search engine of your choice and search for it if you don't know. Some people know what 2 of the letters stand for. Not many people know all 3 stand for. So the first one is the I stands for integrated. Okay, sometimes people think it stands for interactive, but it stands for integrated. And the D is development. This is a bit of a nerdy question to get to ask a lot of primary teachers. So it's integrated development, and the E is environment. So it's not a word that we use often within the primary classroom, but I don't know, maybe it's a word that we should be using. Leave that up to you. You might reply now and say, absolutely, we should be calling it what it is. So if you know somebody who is a programmer and you've ever seen them bish bash bosh typing it in their programming language, they will be typing it into a thing called an IDE. So we've just been looking at some IDEs. We looked at Rapid Router, we looked at some Hour of Code ones, we looked at Blockly. So all of these collectively are known as IDEs, not IEDs. That's something completely different. And these IDEs are block-based. So I'm now going to show you a text-based IDE. Now, this one, I sometimes, I do hold back a little bit when people are saying that they're teaching their year 5s how to program in Python. Like, really? You know, are you sure that's such a wise move? And now if I could ask you in the chat, do you teach text-based programming languages to year 5s or year 6s? I'm not asking should you, I'm just asking do you? Okay. Because, I mean, I would always say there's so many other great tools and approaches out there to help children understand about computing and algorithms and computational thinking without having to show them a text-based approach to programming. However, from time to time, it's nice just to show them, to give them. Now, James has come up with the answer. I was hoping somebody would say, maybe some of them, maybe, 3 or 4 that are the digital leaders, or they come to a lunchtime club. And sometimes it's like, so this is a particular resource I'm going to show you that might be a useful thing to try within that capacity or context. I'm not suggesting that you would do this with your whole class of year 5s anyway. So it's Sculpt. So when you go to visit Sculpt, the first thing you see is you see the name, and then if you scroll down, let me just move my windows around a bit. You've got an example which is not so easy to read on a sunny day. It's colored text on a black background. Now, some people won't be able to read it, so I'm going to read out what it says. So it says import turtle. T equals turtle.turtle. And then we have for C in, and this thing here, this thing, we can refer to this as a list. It's got 4 objects in the list. Each one is a string, but most people would just say it's got red, green, yellow, and blue in the list. And then we have some indented code here that says for C in red, green, yellow, blue, T.color C, T.forward. Now, I would expect pretty much any child in year 5 in the country, I ask them, if we type this in to an IDE that understands Python, what do you think is going to happen? Most of them will shrug their shoulders and not be able to see. But there is a nice bit of potential here to say, well, it mentions turtle. What clues have we got? It says red, green, yellow, and blue. It says something about going forward. It says something about turning left. Oh, and if we think back to something we were looking at earlier, our rapid router that I mentioned, I was going to refer back to, there's some clues there. So then they start to say, oh, it'll draw lines, or maybe the lines will be different colors. So I'm going to pause, and I'm going to take a gamble that you haven't seen this before. So I'm going to ask you now, teachers in the chat, type in a sentence, please. I'm going to pause. Type in your sentence. What do you predict will happen when I execute this Python code here? Now, bear in mind, I've just given you a few clues. And I would much rather you answer the question now and give me a wrong answer than be too shy and think, oh, he doesn't want me to type in the chat. There are 8 of you. It would be great if we got 6 or 7 responses, even if you've been sat there silently all the way through. So I'm going to pause just for a moment, and I'm looking at the clock, and I can see it's 5 to 5, and I'm planning to wrap this up in the next 2 or 3 minutes. So I'm pausing while you type in your hypothesis or your prediction, what you think this piece of Python code will output when I execute it. So we've got a few suggestions coming through. So I can see some common features. So we've got people talking about turtles. Somebody's mentioned a specific color. We all seem to agree that there's some turning involved. So just so that we're not sat here all afternoon waiting for people to answer, what I'm now going to show you is, now this is a bit confusing. There's some windows here that we're not going to use. We're not going to use this window, and we're not going to use this one. But I am going to click the run button in a moment, and when I click run, another window will open where it will output a display. Oh, did we only get 2 answers to the chat, or some people still thinking about it? Okay, so I'm going to click run now, and now I'm going to have to scroll to the bit where the output is, and there's the output. Now you just have to believe me, it wasn't there before, and it is there now. And if you see this little blue icon, it's a little arrow. What it did was it moved forward and drew a red line, then turned left and drew a green line, and so on. Now try and hold that picture in your mind for a moment. So red, green, yellow, blue. And now let's look back at the bit of code that we had. Now, the next thing, so I'm thinking if I had a year 5 class now and I'd shown that to all of the class, I might now have another copy available in my browser where I'd made some changes, where it might say something like, so let's imagine that they haven't seen the changes yet. Okay, so you're going to see me do this live. And, oh, so I'm making some changes. Oops. Okay, so I've changed a few things, and now what I could be asking you to do is, can you make a prediction what will happen this time when I execute it? Or maybe don't make a prediction necessarily, but tell me, how will it be different in one way from the object that we saw before? So what I've done, in case those people, you weren't paying attention, I've changed some of the values in this line here. I've changed some values in this line, and I've changed some values in this line here, the 3rd line down. So I'm now waiting patiently for the people in the chat to type in what they think will be the output or how it may be different from the previous one. Now, while you're thinking about that, I'm just going to have a look back to my notes. So there were some other text-based IDEs I was going to look at, but we didn't get round to that. There is another one called Code Sculptor, which has games that the children can play. But then what you can do within the games is you can, like this, you can hack the code, you can change the code, and then get the students and children to predict what the output might be. So we've got bigger and no longer a square. Now, if this was a child in front of me to answer that question, oh, so you don't think it's going to be a square anymore? And they could answer me back, and they could say something like, well, no, because you changed the angle. Oh, okay, so it was 90 degrees. Can you show me with your fingers what 90 degrees would look like? And they might do this or something like that. And then I'd say, so how would 60 be different? They could say, well, 60 would be like this, and say, oh, and then if we've been talking about geometry recently, then we can make some links to other elements of the curriculum. It will turn right 4 times, but not a square. So the bit we can go and do now is we can scroll down. So I would canvass opinions from the class. We could maybe have 3 or 4 different answers, ask people to go along. Oh, so you told me an answer. So you tell me an answer. Why do you think Michael's right? Do you think Vanessa's answer is better? Why do you think Vanessa's, so we can have quite a bit of discussion. And we only need one computer to do this. I click on run and I scroll down and, oh, and usually that's the bit where and the hand goes, oh, I know what's happened. I know what's happened. And somebody wants to shout out, oh, it's an exterior angle. And like, oh gosh, we haven't even done internal external angles. One of the questions that comes up a lot is, what happened here? Like, why is it like this? And we can then have our theories and we can see, I think it's because, so the children can be putting forward their theories and we can go back. Let's make a change to see. So somebody just said it's because they think it's too big, whereas if we change this number to a smaller one, so instead of 150, let's make it 130. And now I click on run. And somebody's just got really excited because they said before it was too big and it went off the screen. By making it slightly smaller, it now all fits on. Okay. Now, that's not teaching children Python. It's not teaching them a text-based programming language. It's just helping them understand how the things that they've been doing with the blocks and the turtles and the bee bots, how it all links to things that happens in the bigger world. Now, it's 5 o'clock. So I'm now, in a moment, going to press the pause button on the recording. No, I'm actually going to press the stop button. There's just 2 more things I'd like to mention before you go, and hopefully you're still there. I did actually have a list of things I wanted to recommend to you, as well as the program that we had. One thing I'd love to, if you can, if you're liking what you've seen so far, is I'm organising a conference in Bradford on Friday the 29th of June. Now, it's the 3rd time we're doing it. It's a teaching and learning with technology conference. Unfortunately, it's not free because there is a cost to these things. However, sometimes people have put forward a strong case as to why they can't afford a ticket. But tickets are £10 or £50, depending whether your school is a customer of Exit or not. So if you really can't afford the £10 or the £50, then put forward an appeal and I will find some way to get you there. However, some people that I mentioned earlier, like Nick, are coming for free because they've agreed to support or lead a session. It takes place in Bradford on Friday, 29th of June, in a fantastic hotel with lots of comfy chairs. And 2 teachers came last year because they just wanted to spend the whole day talking to Phil Bagg. So Phil did a keynote last year. We've got Phil, we've got Miles, Barry coming along as well. In fact, we've probably got lots of people coming along that you've already heard of and you may have met, and some of them I mentioned early on. It's a fantastic conference, and I'm not just saying that because I organised it. I'm saying that because people who came last year said it was the best. Well, not all of them said this. A lot of people said it was the best conference that they'd ever been to. Maybe they'd not been to many other conferences before. I mentioned the Hello World magazine. And the final thing I'm going to mention before I say goodbye is, please, could you now give some feedback? You click here on this form, and it will take you no more than a minute or so. Look, okay, it'd be useful to know your name and which webinar. So you can say today was the 21st of May, it was the primary one, and whether you found it useful or actually no, it was a complete waste of your time. So please be frank and honest and constructive in any comments. And I'm now going to press the stop button on the recording. Thank you very much. Bye. I'll let you know and I'll send you an invite to the next webinar, but I'm going to hang around for a couple of minutes after the recording has stopped.